Next, we're going to make our player object a bit more visually interesting by adding a bit of animation to it. And what we're going to do is create a kind of jet afterburner rocket flare kind of effect coming out the back of the player sprite, and we're going to do this using a particle system, which is a sort of inbuilt graphical special effect that GameMaker has, and it's normally used to make things like rain and snow, fire, smoke, basically by sort of producing lots of little particles which you can then emit from a stream. Yeah, something like that. It's a little bit complicated to explain, and the actual coding for it looks complicated, but it's a very nifty effect, and you can use it in lots of different ways and applications, and it's a good thing to kind of understand and use in your games. So we're going to start by making a sprite that's going to be the particle. So let's go to sprites, create sprite. I've already made something, so I'm going to load it up. It's called Thrust. It's slightly transparent. Let's open that up. I'm just going to give it a name. Sprite. I'm going to center the origin. I'll just show you that sprite a bit zoomed in. So it's just like a pink circle, basically, small. I think it's about 8 by 8 pixels. Okay, so I've got that thing there, and that is going to be the particle that's going to emit in a stream from the back of the player object. As I said before, the particle systems look fairly complicated to code. They're not difficult, they're just complex. So if you get stuck, you can go to this question mark icon, and it'll bring up the GameMaker Studio manual. And if you go to index, let's type in particles. It obviously gives you a full explanation of how they work. And if we use part, you can see here these are all the particle variables and functions. As you can see, there's quite a lot of them there. The first thing we need to do is actually create the particle system, so that's part system create. So there it's telling you the syntax and how it works. Okay, so if you get stuck, it's really useful to know where that is. So let's just click on that question mark icon. We're going to create the particle system as a separate object, so it's a bit more easy to manage and understand. So go to objects, create object, and we'll call it jet. It's not going to have any sprite because we're going to create this particle system for it. And the particle system is a step event because it's going to be drawing the graphic every frame of the game. So let's go to our events, add event, and create a step event, and it's a normal step event, so standard. Then we go to control, create a bit of code, drag and drop that in there. We're going to give a hint, so we're going to create a jet particle system. And the first thing we have to do is create a name for this particle system to use in the variables and functions. So we're going to call it jet1 equals part system, and here's on the help thing here, create. It doesn't have any other variable to that, so we just do these close brackets at the end because it doesn't do anything else other than create the particle system name, which is equals jet1. Let's semicolon that to finish it off. And any particle system has parts, so we need to specify that as well. So we call it part1 equals part type. Let's find that on here. Part type create. And again, close the brackets. It does one thing, it just creates that variable. Because you can have multiple parts to a particle system. As you can see, this is why it gets complicated. So first of all, we need to define the part type that it is, and the part type is a sprite that we've just created. So we type in part type, and it's a sprite. So let's find part type sprite. So here in the help thing, it's giving us the rest of the variables to it. So it's the index, so that will be the sprite part, the sprite itself, which will be the thrust sprite, whether it's animated, whether it's stretched, and whether it's sort of random. So I'm going to open up the manual so we can have a look at this a bit better. So let's set part type sprite. Let's go in here. Let's move that down a bit. Let's move that down. Whoops. Minimize that. Part type. Let's go to the index, sorry. Let's find sprite. So now it's telling us the arguments. So the index, particle type to change, and all the rest of the stuff. So let's just go back and sort that out. So the first thing we need to specify is the part type. So that's part 1, which is what we've created here. So basically what we're saying is part 1 is a sprite part. Then we need to tell it which sprite it is. So it's the thrust sprite, which comes up here. Just click on it. Let's go back and find out what the other parameters were again. So whether to animate or not. Well, there's no animation to it, so it's either set to true or false. We're not going to animate it, so it's false. The next parameter, let's go back again and have a quick look at it, is stretch. Whether to stretch the sprite's animation to match the particle lifespan. Well, we're not animating, so that'll be false too. And also this random function here, if we had an animation, it would play back the frames randomly. So we're not doing that either. So both of those can be false. And false. If you don't put in all the arguments, then the function won't work. Next, I'm going to use a function called part type size. So this will create the thrust sprite getting smaller as it shoots out of the back of the player spaceship sprite. So let's select that. So we need to specify the part again, so it's part 1. And let's go to our help menu. This time part type size. So the second argument is the minimum size the particle can start at. So it'll kind of randomly create a minimum maximum range, yeah, between the third argument. So if you have like 1 is the same size as the sprite, so 0.5 would be half, 2 would be double the size. That's kind of how it works. So we're going to create a little bit of random variation in the sprite that comes out. So let's minimize that again. So the minimum size it can be is half, the maximum size it can be is full size, which is 1. So those two arguments here. The next argument is the increase in size as it shoots out. So, and this is done in the steps or frames of the game. What we want it to do is decrease in size. So we've got a negative value. So we go minus 0.1. So it'll decrease 0.1 every frame as it kind of leaves the emitter or the back of the spaceship in this case. And the last parameter is wiggle, and this creates like a kind of like a wiggle effect, so it'll increase and decrease in size fractionally over time. So we're going to set that to 0 because we don't want it to do that. If you look down here, it's telling you all these arguments as well, okay, and what we're set to. Let's finish that off with semicolon. Next thing to do is specify the particle life. Oh, part type life, sorry. And this is how long the particle lasts for, its lifespan. So the part type index is part 1. And if you look down here, we've got 2 arguments now, minimum lifespan and maximum. So we're going to set those to both the same, of 300 frames and to 300. Okay, that seems quite like a lot, but you're going to see it's going to decrease in size and kind of tail off. Next, we're going to make the particles move, and we're going to make them move using gravity. Okay, and this will create like a gravitational pull on the particle and make it move with a slight acceleration, which creates a really cool effect. So again, we need to specify the type index. So that's part 1. We're all working on the same part. And the amount of gravity. And we're going to put a random range in here because I want it to kind of look quite organic. And the way we do that is use a function called random and then underscore range. So this gives us 2 values that it can be between. So 0.5 gravity and 2. So instead of being sort of a constant stream, it'll kind of change sort of randomly. Next, we need to set the direction of the gravity, and the way GameMaker works in its degrees is right is 0 degrees direct right, and then it goes round clockwise. So directly below is 90, left is 180, and then top is 270, and then round again to 0. So we want it to go sort of backwards, left in this case. So we set that to 180 degrees. Don't worry if it's just kind of across like it's pretty complicated. You can just use the manual to check these out. And the last thing, well, the last kind of part type I'm going to specify is the alpha channel. So basically going to make it transparent over time as well. So I'm going to select part type alpha 1, specify the part 1, and it's going to decrease its alpha in a random range again. So I'm going to type in random and range and specify 2 values. So this time it's going to be 0.1 to 0.75. So in the alpha channel, the range, or the sort of alpha transparency of the image, 1 is opaque, not transparent at all, and then 0 is completely transparent. So that's why I'm using these 0 point values. Oh, I need to end that with some brackets as well. Yeah, always be aware of that. If you've got something in brackets like this argument here, that you must close the brackets again. Yeah, it'll tell you if it's wrong. You can see that red square by code line 11. That's telling you it's not working properly. That's all the kind of particle functions I'm going to use for the moment. There are a whole host of them, and you can create some really crazy effects with them. And I recommend just, you know, creating a particle system and playing with it, because there's far too much to be able to show you in this tutorial. There's a couple more things that I need to do to finish it off. and I want to create the depth, the drawing depth of the particle system, so that it draws it below the image of the spaceship, otherwise it'll draw it on top. So let's create part system depth. And I mentioned this earlier when we looked at the object editor, that GameMaker deals with depth in terms of drawing layers of graphics. So our player object sprite is drawn at a depth of 0, so we want to draw it below that. So we need to specify the part system first. This time we're not dealing with the part, we're dealing with the particle system itself. So it's called Jet1. And the depth we're going to set to 2. So it draws it underneath. And then finally, we need to actually create this particle system. So particles create, so it's actually going to create this particle system. And the particle system is called Jet1. Now the next arguments are the X and Y of where it's going to emit these particles from. And we want to emit them from the player. Now, because we're not in the player object, we can't use X and Y to specify the position. What we need to do is call the player position by doing this, by typing in player, the name of the object. Oh, I've got. So player1 object, full stop, X. And because we've centered the origin of the sprite, we need to sort of offset that a bit to appear at the back of the sprite. So X minus 18 pixels. Now we need to put the Y value. Oops, spell it right. Player1, full stop, Y. So that's giving us where we're going to create the particles from. And it's going to be the player X and Y value. Next, it's asking us for the part type that we've just created, which is called part1. So all those kind of variables that we just created, that's going to happen. And then finally, how many particles we're going to create. So we're going to create 10 particles. And these are created every step of the game. And let's finish that off. So here's the code for our particle system. What we're going to do now is tell our player object to create this jet object. So let's close that down and open up the player1 object. And we're going to create a new event, and this is the create event. And this happens as soon as that object is loaded into the level of the room. So anything that we code in here will happen as soon as this object appears, essentially. So we're going to go to Control, Code, drag that into the Actions window. So in our Create event, let's put a hint, and create jet object. And we use a function called instance create. And the arguments are the X and Y position. It doesn't really matter what we kind of put in here really, because in the particle system it specifies where the particle is going to be generated from. So we're just going to put X and Y there. So it'll create it at the central position of the player1 sprite. And the object we want to create is jet. And that's it, close brackets. And that's end that off. So when the game creates the player1 object, it will simultaneously create the jet object. So let's OK that. OK. Let's just test that out. And there we go. So you can see we got that sort of rocket kind of flare, afterburner, whatever it is, effect. It probably doesn't look that impressive for what we've coded, but I think it looks pretty neat. And it's a really kind of sort of smart way of creating it, rather than sort of creating animation. And I think it looks really nice. Plus, if you can start to work with particles, as I said before. I mean, you can do some really interesting things with them.